Gin party. How many of you have done this before? Do you know what this is? Okay, so for those of you that don't know, this is a concept called dark dining. So this is where you eat in the dark, right? You're blind, it's complete dark, pitch black, you can't see anything. The servers are wearing night vision goggles. They lead you into this pitch black, and they sit you down at the table, and they tell you where things are. I'm refilling your wine at your 12 o'clock. I'm putting down a meal in front of you on your plate. And they don't tell you what you're eating, and you just sort of feel around and use your hands, and you're eating with friends. Anybody done this? Nobody? I haven't done this, but I imagine it would be a lot of fun. Now, when you ask the people who have done this, they all say the same thing. They all say, it was one of the best dining experiences of my life. And they say, the food was delicious. Now, I highly doubt that the best food in the world is at some of these dark dining places. However, one of the things that I can understand from that is that they are making you pay attention to the flavor of the food. How are they doing that? They're removing some of your senses. They're taking away your sense of sight, so all of your other senses have to compensate for it, right? Your sense of smell is heightened, your sense of hearing is heightened, your sense of taste is heightened. So now you're paying attention to the flavor of the food because you can't see it. And you start to realize, I would imagine, how much you would take for granted the food that you see and eat, and then food that you actually don't see and eat. It's a kind of an interesting experience. They go to great lengths to get you to taste their food. And they go to great lengths to get you to realize how tasty their food is. I think there's something interesting about that. Some of you out there are probably phenomenal designers. Who out there is a phenomenal designer? Okay, for the rest of you, we're going to do a confidence workshop afterwards. Okay. For all of you phenomenal designers, I would imagine that you've had this experience. You've made the best design of your life. You've cranked away in front of Photoshop for hours. You've presented it to your clients or your stakeholders or your bosses, and they go, meh. Right? How many people have had that experience? And you've probably realized that the best design, even the best design that you've made in your life, sometimes isn't good enough. Sometimes being a great graphic designer, being a great interface designer isn't enough. Right? In order for great design to succeed, you've got to do a better job at setting the table. You've got to do a better job of removing some senses from the people that are interacting with it and hearing it, and making them focus really on the thing that you want them to taste and digest and savor. Right? You want them to pay attention to certain things and not pay attention to other things. You need to set the table for them to be able to do this. One of the things that I've found in my career is that sometimes you solve the design problems at the wrong stage. Right? Sometimes the design problems get solved 6 weeks earlier in the contract that you wrote, or in the presentation that you did, or in any of the things that set up the design, in that conversation that you had in the kickoff workshop. Sometimes you solve the design problems way earlier by setting the table properly. So I want to show you kind of what that looks like. There's a guy named Bill Simmons, and he interviewed President Obama for the magazine GQ, which is a men's quarterly. And he asked him, he said, what are some of the largest lessons that you've learned as President of the United States? And this is what President Obama said. He said, I've realized that you can't separate good policy from the need to bring people along and make sure that they know why you're doing what you're doing. Now, this is arguably one of the most powerful men in the world. And even he says, well, I can't just tell people what to do and expect them to do it. I actually have to bring them along. I have to bring them along on the journey. I have to tell them why we're doing things so that they can come along and they can decide for themselves what to do. Even he understands the importance of setting the table properly. I did some work with the Seventh-day Adventist Church about 6 months ago. If you don't know the Seventh-day Adventist Church, it is a global church. It's a centralized denomination. So what that means is that they have a worldwide general conference, and that's distributed into divisions, continental divisions, and those are distributed into geographical regions, which are distributed into unions and conferences and in local churches. So they'll map up to this general conference. And to give you a sense of scope and scale of this organization, they have 70,000 churches, 13 world divisions. They have 63 publishing houses where they publish literature. They have 350 languages that they publish in. There's 15 media centers, and they do disaster relief in over 130 countries. And the project that we did for them was they don't have a centralized design system. And so what they hired us to do is to create a design language for them that any one of these churches or publishing houses or media centers, whenever they want to publish something on the web, they can use this design system, this pattern library, these style guides that we create for them in order to publish, so that all of the things that they do look and feel the same. Now, our project started about 6 months ago, and we finished it up about 3 months ago, so it's a 3-month project overall. But the project really started before we got involved. It started 2 years ago. It started 2 years ago when a guy named Brent, who was the web manager at the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who was our main client, he decided that this needed to be done. And he knew that he was going to have an uphill battle convincing some of his bosses to do this project. So here's how he went about it. He printed out these 3-inch by 3-inch note cards, and there's a US quarter there shown for scale. It's about the size of a euro. And he printed out these note cards, and he printed out all of the websites that they made that year in the building that he works in. So not across the world, not everything they published, but just the building that he works in. Last year, he printed out these thumbnails. And he took all these thumbnails, and there were about 130 in total, and he put them on black mounting boards. And if you look at them this way, if you sort of squint at them, you realize how different each one of them is. Different colors, different logos, different color schemes, different layouts. All of these sites were built by hand from scratch without any unification. So Brent took these printouts, he put them on mounting boards. He walked into his boss's office with, I think it was about 8 or 9 mounting boards, and he put them on the wall. And he said to his boss, "We're spending too much money on something that we don't need to spend that much money on. I know how to fix this, but if you see the problem, I need this budget to be able to save us this much more down the line." Right? So he did the legwork to be able to convince his bosses and his clients, his stakeholders, that this project needed to be done. There was no pushback. The board unanimously voted that this project needed to be done. He walked out of that meeting with his budget in hand, and he hired us to do this work with him. The project was one of the best projects I've ever worked on, and I credit Brent for setting the table, for doing a great job with his stakeholders to make sure that we could do a really good design project. Had we started without that buy-in, the project would have been significantly more difficult. I've been designing since 1998. Who has been designing since then? Okay, a few of you. And I must admit something. The blank browser, the blank Photoshop canvas, the blank Illustrator canvas, it still terrifies me today. Anybody have that same feeling? Now, what gives me confidence, though, when I look at this and I start a project and I go, wow, this is a blank slate. What do we do? How do we start this? What gives me confidence is that I know how to quickly fill this screen. And this is how you quickly fill this screen. You can do research. Now, the problem with research is that there's a name for it, right? It's not just research, it's research. And people have titles like researcher. And that's a great thing. If you have a researcher on your team, you are lucky. But if you don't have a researcher on your team, sometimes we default to, well, we don't have a researcher, so we can't do research. But really, what research is just talking to people. Now, we've been doing that forever. We've been doing that since we were kids. Right? We learn to talk. It's one of the first things that we learn how to do, aside from breathe and eat, and it's one of our basic skills. We learn how to communicate. And research is really just talking to people and asking them questions, some smart questions, some obvious questions, some not so obvious questions. And so this is something that all of us can do. There's a great book called Change by Design by Tim Brown. Tim Brown is the CEO of IDEO, which is a great design consultancy. And in this book, he talks about research, and he says, the easiest thing about the search for insight, right, that research, is that it's everywhere and it's free. So essentially what he's saying is that we all have access to insight. That's not just one person's job or one team's job. All of us can do it, and at no cost. We can all do this for free, and we all get access to be able to do it. We all have the ability to do it. One of the projects I worked on about 1.5 years ago is to redesign Philly.com. Now, I'm from Philadelphia, and Philly.com is one of the largest news sites in the region. Most people who get their news in Philadelphia either get it from the print newspaper, which Philly.com publishes, called the Philadelphia Inquirer, or they read Philly.com. Now, the project that we did with them was to redesign that site, but before we did anything, we just started talking to people. Before we did any design or even planning or anything, we just talked to people. We talked to people who currently use the site, we talked to people who work at Philly.com, and we talked to people, maybe most importantly, we talked to people who don't use the site at all, right? Because those are some of the people that we want to be able to use the new site. Now, if you've never done research, or if you've never done research for a project, or that's been the responsibility of a researcher on your team, I'm going to give you a really simple framework for doing that. You don't have to be a pro. I'll give you 3 simple questions that you can ask. And these are the questions that we asked people when we were redesigning Philly.com. The first question we asked was, why should we redesign this site? Right? Pretty simple question. The second question that we asked is, why should we redesign the site now? Right? As opposed to yesterday, or last month, or last year, or next year, right? Why should we redesign it now? What's important about this moment in time that was going to make a redesign special? And the third thing is, how will we know if the new site is better than the old one, right? How are we going to know if it worked? We could redesign it and it could have no impact. So how are we going to know if it's actually better? Right? And these are 3 questions that you can ask. Now, we just asked these 3 questions. We didn't have a complicated script, an interview script. This was our script. And we talked to people for about an hour each, on average, just with these 3 questions, and a couple of natural follow-up questions that are just sort of good conversation. Now, this is not like an official script, but this can get you started in having a conversation. We talked to 30 people, and we got basically 300 hours of 30 hours of conversation just through this that we could sort through. And I'll talk about what we did with that in a little bit. Now, these aren't the only questions that you can ask if you're trying to do some research for a product that you're making or a site or anything like that. There are other questions that you can ask. And you could just do some quick Google searches, but I'll give you a couple of other frameworks that you can research on your own. This is a great book. It's called How to Make Sense of Any Mess. It's by Abby Covert. What I love about this book is that it's a strategy book disguised as an information architecture book. So she advertises it as an information architecture book, but it's really about strategy. And it's really about what the title says. It's how to make sense of any mess. Sometimes organizations are a mess. Sometimes websites are a mess. Sometimes infrastructures are a mess. This book kind of gives you frameworks on how to deal with all of that stuff. And in this book, Abby suggests some questions that you can ask when you're trying to understand what you need out of a particular thing. So some questions that she suggests are things like, why does this work need to be done? Why is the change needed? Why hasn't this been tackled correctly? What's going to be different this time around? Right? So really simple questions, fairly obvious, but these are great questions for an interview to understand what you actually need out of a product, or what users need out of a product. Last example, and like I said, there's countless examples of these. There's a great book called Interviewing Users by Steve Portigal, published by Rosenfeld Media. And Steve Portigal, he suggests a couple of topics that you can ask about. So you can ask a user about sequence. You know, what do you do first? What do you do next? What do you do after that? Right? That's a great topic area. Or relationships, or their process, or their native language. You can ask them about all these different things. So there are all these great frameworks on asking questions, but I hope the common thread that you take from that is that they're all simple questions. They're all things that you don't need a degree to be able to do. You don't need a special type of expertise in order to have conversations about these things. Anybody here can do those things. All right, so we asked all these users and these people that work at Philly.com, we asked them, why redesign the site? Why redesign it now? How are we going to know if it's different? And they gave us all sorts of answers. We took all those answers, we listened to them again, the recordings, and we organized all their answers, did a little card sorting exercise into these buckets. And there are about 18 different buckets. Now, you don't need to read through these or memorize these or anything. You'll probably find something similar if you do this on your projects. But these are the main themes that we understood from what people wanted out of a new site. So there are things like, it's important to minimize the workflow, right? That was a thing that some of the people who worked there wanted to do. From a lot of users, we heard things like establishing trust and bolstering respect. So they wanted to know that this was the trusted news source for the region, not just one of them. Right? So we heard this mix of goals. Now, all of you work on projects. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new to say it's really easy to do a project with one goal. Right? So for example, if we pick any one of those at random, we're going to do a project where we're going to make a site that increases reader engagement. Right? We could design features and come up with things that do that. But when you add one more goal into that, it becomes infinitely harder. Right? So as an example, okay, what if we did a project where we were minimizing workflow? We could do that. But how do you do a project where you minimize workflow and at the same time increase editorial flexibility? Now those goals are at tension. Right? There's a tension between those two. And at some point, you're going to have to decide one or the other. So when you get a project, one of the first things that we do on projects is we lay out all the goals and then we prioritize them. Right? We try to understand, well, in the case where this one goes against this one directly, which one do we pick? Right? And you know, another example that I can give you is we could do a project where we, for example, showcase the newsroom. Philly.com has 3 different newsrooms. They have the Philadelphia Inquirer, they have the Daily News, which is a sort of a tabloid, and they have Philly.com, the site. So we could showcase all the newsrooms and sort of say, here's who they are, but how do we do that by creating a unified brand at the same time? It's much more difficult. So when your goals are at tension, one of the most important things you can do with those is you can help to prioritize, right? That could be your job. And the way that we did that was we got these people in the room. So these are all the people that were on our project team on the client side. And we got people in the room. You know, normally when we do a project like this, sometimes what's expected is you do a website redesign, you have the web team in the room, right? Makes sense. And then you get down the line and you do 6 weeks or 6 months worth of work, and then all of a sudden the director of sales gets wind of this project and he blows up your project. Right? So what we did was, to start this project, we got all these people in the room. We got the chief information officer of the company in the room with the lead systems analyst, in the same room with the design director, in the same room with the controller. All the people that operate all the different parts of their business, we got them all in the same room and talked about these goals. So as an organization, where do your priorities lie? What is important to you? Not just, okay, of course, the person who is running ad sales wants to make more money. Of course, that's going to be the number one goal. But as an organization, where does that actually lie? And so here's what we did. We took those 18 themes, and we wrote them on big Post-it sheets, and we posted them on the wall, and we just wrote the name of that goal at the top, right? The name of that objective at the top. So we had these 3, you know, an example here, 3 objectives. And we gave each person in the room these pink Post-it notes. And each person got 3 Post-it notes, and we said, you can take these Post-it notes and you can use them to vote. So you can take this Post-it note and stick it on whichever objective you think is the most important, and the 3 most important things on this wall. You can spend them all on one. If you think, you know, maybe making money is the most important thing, you could spend all 3 of your votes on that one. Or if you want to spread them out, that's totally fine. It's up to you how you spend your votes. So we just waited a couple minutes, and we watched as people walked around the room, the tech director and the director of sales and product managers there, and as they kind of inventoried all the goals that they had and chose where to put their votes. And eventually what we ended up with was something that looked a little bit more like this. And if you squint a little bit, if you sort of like, you know, don't really focus on the details, if you kind of squint at this, you'll start to see that it resembles a little bit of a heat map. Right? And that heat map represents the organizational priorities. Right? It's kind of the wisdom of the crowd, of the room. So maybe one person thinks making money is the most important thing, but maybe the room itself thinks that's the fourth most important priority. And we gave each person a chance to sort of lobby for theirs. So maybe one person who's really passionate about a thing could convince somebody else to change their votes. Right? So we had a couple of rounds of doing this. But we start to get this heat map of here's what's important to the organization at this point in time. And what you can start to do is, when you have 18 goals and you do an exercise like this, you can start to prioritize them. That's the first piece, right? So you can say, okay, here's the order of these things, right? And you can do that by tallying. And we ratify this stuff throughout the project. We constantly ask, wait, are you sure this is number 8 instead of number 7, right? When we see a point of tension, we stop and we say, all right, well, remember when we did that prioritization exercise? It seems like this was a prioritization then. Has that changed? If it has, that's cool, but we have to go back and redo a couple of things. Right? So the first thing you can do is prioritize. And the second thing you can do is you can say, this project, we're going to focus on 3 priorities. That's it. And all the rest, right, numbers 4 through 18 are the roadmap. And that's a thing that you can give to your clients or your bosses or your colleagues. You can say, okay, we know all the things that are important to us, but not all of them are important right now, and not all of them are equally important. So I can take all those things and say, all right, we're going to do a project for the next 6 weeks that focuses on priority 1 and 2, and then all the rest of it is going to be a roadmap, and as we get to it, we're going to tackle those things. That's a really useful thing you can do. Now, what you can do with this, you can do a ton of different things with this. What I suggest is a way to measure these things. And that's a whole talk in itself, but I can give you a couple of pointers, a couple of directions into what you can do with these. So a couple of frameworks. One thing you can do with these is you can write SLAs. You can write service level agreements. Some of you are probably already doing that now. So you can write a service level agreement that says, here's what we pledge to do with these 3 goals and how we plan to achieve them. You can write KPIs, and you can write OPIs, so you can write key performance indicators or operational performance indicators that help you measure those. Probably my personal favorite is writing OKRs, objectives and key results. So what can you actually do with these? How do you measure them? At what frequency do you measure them? When do you revisit these things? There are a ton of other frameworks like this. These are just a handful of them. Kyle this morning talked a little bit about the Jobs to be Done framework by Clayton Christensen. There's a whole ton of ways that you can do this, but it's important that you pick one and try it out. All right, so I've been talking about design, it's supposed to be a design talk, but I haven't even talked about Photoshop, Sketch, Illustrator, any of those things yet. And that's because I think in real life, the killer design app is actually just smart planning. I think that's the way to achieve really good design, is if you plan really well. I saw a quote, I think this morning, it was an Albert Einstein quote that said something like, if I had 20 days to build a thing, I'm paraphrasing, if I had 20 days to build a thing, I'd spend 19 of them planning. All right, so you plan smartly and you know exactly what you're going to do. Now this is the part that we're all good at. We're all good at making things, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Just in case, maybe you're doing a side project and so you're like, I'm not really sure what to do, but I want to do a side project. I'm not really sure what to do though. There's a great GitHub repo by, is it cut off at the top? By Melanie Richards. And she just suggests 75 things that you can do, right? So like the common phrase is like, just build websites. Well, what kind of website do I need to build? And she suggests 75 things. So here are 75 different types of websites that you can build. This is a great starter. But I'm assuming you're going to take this back to your companies and your jobs. You probably already know what you're going to build because a client has hired you to build it or because you have a product that you run. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I am going to spend time on what happens after that. So you decide what to build and what to make, and then you have to show it to somebody. Right? And that's a really important part of the design process. You have to show it to somebody because somebody is approving a paycheck or a bill or a yes, this should ship. And so how do you do that in a way that gets them to go yes instead of meh, back to the drawing board? Most times it's this, it's the dreaded design presentation. And we all mess this up, right? I've been presenting design for many years. I still mess this up too. It's a thing that we got to practice over and over and over again. And I'll show you the common mistakes that we do, right? So here's what we do. This is Amazon's homepage. If I would present Amazon's homepage, it goes something like this. In the left, there's a logo. There's a search, too. There's a big thing that we want to promote because promoting things are what we do. It's blue. Right? So awkward. So awkward. We always do this. We all do this. We just point to where things are. It's called the real estate tour, right? It's just like, that's over there, and that's over there, and that's over there, and this is over here. If you haven't read this book, this is a great book. Design is a Job by Mike Montero, and Mike calls us out for doing this stuff in the book. Mike says, don't waste the client's time walking them through what they can already see. Your job is to explain how what they're looking at is the best way to achieve their goals. Right, so when you do a design presentation, I'll give you a quick tip. A great word to use is because. We put the logo over there because that's where we know people look most, and we want to reinforce our branding. We put the search at the top because it's the most important feature, and that's the thing we want people to do most. We put the nav on white text on navy blue because we wanted a high contrast so people wouldn't miss it. Right, so because is a great word to use when you're doing a design presentation. We did this, right? Don't just say what you did, say because, tell them why. We did this because, we did this because, we did this because. That's the start of a really good design presentation. All right, so as I've been presenting, and I'm thinking about this, like, all right, goals and not features, not just pointing to where things are, I had this kind of freeing realization a couple years ago that, like, when I think about what a good design presentation is, I think it's this. A great design presentation is actually an information architecture presentation, right? Because you're just talking about, we put this here, we made this decision because of this reason. We're talking about goals, priorities, hierarchy, order, right? Those are all things that we talk about when we talk about information architecture. I think the trouble is we usually present information architecture over things that look like this, right? A wireframe. Now, I have a lot of trouble with wireframes. And the reason I have trouble with wireframes is that they're abstractions, right? Nobody will ever see a site like this except you right now. right? That's a problem. We're supposed to be making things that are in the most final form that they can be in, and yet we present them this way. If I change the color of that header to a slightly lighter gray, it will change how people interact with it, right? I change contrast, I change size, I change type. All things that you do in graphic design. Somebody's clapping. I love you, man. All of those will change how I interact with this thing. So this is really tough. This is a really tough deliverable. I recently worked with a really smart information architect, and she made a wireframe deck, and she was so insistent on wanting to present it to the client. She's like, we have to show this to the client. So I had a private phone call with her, and I was like, well, tell me more about this, like help me understand what's important about these. And eventually what came out was, she was like, look, I spent a lot of time on these. A lot of my thinking is in these, and I really want to show it to the client. And I think that's totally valid. I think that is a very valid reason. When people spend time on things, they become precious. And even if they're not precious for the sake of being precious, when you pour a lot of your thinking into something, you don't want that to go in the trash. And so the conversation that I had with her was this. I said, the thing that I value most about working with you is not the artifacts that you make. I have a whole team of designers that can make artifacts all day. Like, that's what they are specifically good at, making deliverables that look good. But you, I like your brain most. The stuff that you think about and the way that you think about those. Those are things that my team doesn't have, or they don't have it as well as you do. So what I want from you are the ideas. I want the thinking. I don't want the artifact. So if you can give me the thinking, here's the deal that I'll make with you. If you can give me the thinking, if you can annotate all this, if this can be just for us, then what I can do is I can have me and my team put together the best illustration of that thinking for you to talk over. Right? And that's kind of the kind of dialogue that we have and that I have with information architects. So I'll show you an example of that. I worked with O'Reilly Media a couple of years ago to redesign their site. And most of you have probably come across an O'Reilly book. They're the ones with the animal covers. Sarah just showed her O'Reilly book that was coming out. And I worked with I'm spoiling it. I worked with an information architect named Jennifer Brooke, and she is awesome. She's like the best IA researcher, UX, whatever you want to call her, that I've worked with. And we had that same conversation, except in reverse. So Jennifer said to me, the first thing she said to me was like, I would love it if I could never design a wireframe ever in my life again. I'm like, great, yeah, awesome. I was like, so what do you want to make instead? And she's like, well, what do you need? I was like, well, I want all of your thoughts, because you've been thinking about this way longer than I have, and you think about this stuff differently than I do. So I just want your thinking on like what should be on every page, and what should all the pages be, and how should they be kind of architected, and how should people move through them, and what kind of content should go on, all that stuff. And so this is what she made. And I love this. This is better than any wireframe I've received or made ever in my life. This is so great. So on this project, we knew we were using Pattern Lab as a tool. We were using the Atomic Design methodology by Brad Frost. And so what Jennifer did was she made a spreadsheet for every page of the site. And in the left column, it's the organism, right? So like what component or module or whatever you want to call it is going to be on this page. So this is the ideas page. So we're going to have the header, we're going to have the featured block, we're going to have 4 short links and the latest and best, right? So it's a list of all the things on the page. But then all the different columns are, okay, what's the label of that component? What's the description? What's it supposed to do? What's the core content of that component? What are the features and functionality that component should have? Does it currently exist on the site now? Is it automatic, or is it curated, or is it something that's manual? Like, such great thinking that went into this that doesn't prescribe layout, that doesn't lock me into a box from a graphic design standpoint. It's all the stuff that I need to know. And a lot of this stuff never shows up in a wireframe, right? Like, you annotate a wireframe sometimes, but sometimes you can't get to this level of granularity, right? This like every single thing. Otherwise, it would be an essay. And so this has been super valuable. And this is what's cool about this. If you take a look at that organisms or component column or whatever, there's something interesting about that. Let's just sort of zoom in on it. Something interesting about looking at that in that format is that it exactly matches sort of a mobile comp, right? It's like a mobile screen. It's like it's the hierarchy, just one column. It's all the order of the things that you want in the order that you want them. And so with that, I made comps. And the comp was the first thing that we showed the client. And the small screen comp was the first thing we showed the client. And what's interesting about that is that in the design presentation, I didn't present these. Even though I designed these, Jennifer presented these. So where she would normally walk through a wireframe, instead, she had a fully realized comp that was as close as possible to what the site was going to look like, and we presented them by handing out iPhones at the presentation, right? So we went to the client, here are iPhones, here's, pull up this URL, check it out, right? And they scrolled through it, and Jennifer talked through this stuff. And it's one-to-one, and we talked about all the things that go into a good design presentation. Hierarchy, content, priorities, goals. We put this here because this. This is above this because of this, right? You use the word because a lot. And it was Jennifer's presentation. It wasn't mine. Just because I did the comp doesn't mean that I have to present it. Jennifer, as the person thinking through all this stuff, used that as the main illustration instead of a boxes and arrows, kind of black and white skeleton of a thing that is an abstraction. So you can walk right through this, this spreadsheet column and walk down this page and see how all of these things are represented, right? Some things we change the label when we got to comping, and that's okay, right? Things evolve as they get created, as they get higher and higher fidelity. But these were super easy to make, right? Each of these things maybe took, 30 minutes, a half an hour to comp, because all the thinking was done. You just had to just blaze through the art direction and the UI. And this worked so well with the client that we just did the rest of the site this way, right? We just, everything that we needed to do, Jennifer made a spreadsheet, we designed them all this way. In the meantime, our developers that were working on this were starting to build out these components. And eventually, one of the things, because we were always presenting on phones, at some point when we sent them a URL, it was a URL of working code, right? Because we were building the components, we had all the art direction down, we're using atomic design, we had all these modular styles, and the client was none the wiser when it was a comp or when it was a live build, right? And eventually the live build, the design process was just taken over by the live build. And we didn't need to make a big stink about, all right, now we're going to move out of the design phase and into the development phase. Like that doesn't exist. It's all on the same spectrum. So some of these things were a lot easier to code, so we coded them. Some of these things were a lot easier to comp, so we comped them. But they're all part of the design process. We all use them as design tools. And so we worked this way as long as we could, and this worked really well with the client. We had the right conversations that we needed to have. All right, so again, design presentation. I haven't really talked much about what about art direction and typography and colors? And where do you talk about that? If the design presentation is all about goals and features, goals and not features, and priority and hierarchy, where do you talk about colors and fonts and all that stuff that designers specifically labor over, right? It's the thing that we spend a lot of time on, and we want to show the client because we do that stuff. Well, I think there's a place for that too. Now, I can kind of walk you through how you could do that, but I thought maybe an effective way to do that would be, I'll just do a presentation for you. I'll do a presentation that I did a couple of months ago for a client, and you can see sort of some of the things that I like to point out, and I'll kind of break character every now and then to tell you what I'm trying to do. Does that sound okay? Yeah. Okay, good, because those are the slides that I have. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of context here. So, designing a site for a university in the US, and it's one of the most prestigious engineering schools in the world. And we're redesigning their College of Engineering website. Now, you all are a group of 40 people that we've invited in to just get gut level feedback on the new site. Some of you are parents of students, some of you are current students, some of you are faculty, some of you are community members. And all you know is that we're redesigning the site, right? You're not the team that we've been working with day to day at the university. You're just in to just give us kind of gut level feedback. So it's a little bit of a focus group. It's a little bit of sort of getting a gut reaction from the community at large. That's all the context that you have. So you don't know what the strategy is, you don't know what we're trying to do. It's sort of my job to convince you of that stuff and to tell you about that. Everybody good? Yep. You look great. All right, here we go. So today we're going to talk about art direction and design for the new site for the College of Engineering. Now, some of you have heard some of these words before. Some of you have maybe not heard some of these words before. So let's start with some of the things that are a little bit easier. Let's start with this one, because you probably heard this one before. Design. Now, who has heard the word design before? Okay. Can any of you, and just shout it out if you have an example or an answer, can any of you tell me what design is? How would you define design?
Making things look pretty.
Making things look pretty, totally. What else?
Problem solving.
Problem solving, yes.
Building things.
I'm sorry? Building things, yep.
Planning.
Planning, yep. What else?
Everything.
Everything, totally. Yeah, okay. Anything else? You're all right. All of these are great answers for design. Now, how many of you have heard this? Design is subjective. Anybody heard that before? That's garbage. Design is only subjective if you're too lazy to make it objective. So how do we make it objective? Well, the way to make anything objective is for us to agree on a definition. If we can all agree, then it's a thing that we can use. It's a yardstick that we can use to measure whether or not it's good design or bad design. Make sense? All right, so let me share with you maybe the most effective definition of design that I've heard, then we can agree whether or not to use it. This is from my friend Jared Spool, who runs user interface engineering and a bunch of conferences and is just an overall smart dude. He says, design is the rendering of intent. Do you buy that? It's pretty smart, right? What I love about this definition is that it makes all of us designers. Anybody who renders intent is a designer. You could render intent in Photoshop as a graphic designer, but you could render the intent of a database, or of server architecture, or of your business, or of the way that the fabric exists in the curtains. Like, all of those things are about design. It's all about rendering intent. So that's why design can apply to all of us. We can all be designers of something, right? Rendering intent. Can we all agree that we can use that definition for now until we come up with something better? Yeah. Is that okay? All right. That's good because that's the slides I have. So the second part of this is art direction. Now this one's a little bit trickier, right? This is a phrase that maybe we don't know as much. Even professional art directors have come up to me and said after this, "Thank you for defining art direction. I didn't know what my job is," right? So it's a little bit of a trickier phrase. So let me I'll describe to you what I think the difference is. I think that design is about the look of a thing, right? The rendering part. That's important to design. If we took the rendering part out, it would sort of be missing something. I think art direction is about the feel. So what I'm looking for from you all, the feedback that I'm looking for, is about art direction. I don't really care too much about design feedback. Me and my team, we're good, experienced designers. We can do the design part. But what I want to know from you is, how does this feel? Does it feel right to you? So let me give you examples of what I mean by that. It's very possible to have a great design and poor art direction on a thing. And vice versa. You can have amazing art direction, but poor design. So let me show you an example. Look at that thing. Awful design, awful. Like, what's that typeface? I don't know. It's outlined, which is like one of the biggest sins that you can commit in graphic design. It's like rainbow striped. It's glittery. I'm not sure what it's outlined with. Maybe it's like fuzz or hair or something. It's just really, really bad design, right? Bad design choice. Like, this is the stuff that they try to unteach you when you go to design school. But art direction, what is the feel of a birthday announcement? What is it supposed to feel like? Fun, happy, bright, sparkly, glitter. I mean, maybe your birthday. Pretty spot on from an art direction standpoint, right? So great art direction, maybe not so good design, right? So those two things are separate. So what I'm looking for from you is art direction. And the reason that I can ask for that from you is that you are all great art directors. We were all born great art directors, right? My kids, who were just in the front row, I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old daughter. My 5-year-old is an excellent art director, right? My 2-year-old is an excellent art director. Let me give you an example. For color, right? My daughters can look at this website. This is the website for the movie Maleficent. They can look at this website and they can go, feels scary, right? That was the art direction. That was the brief. Make a site that feels scary. Now, my daughters don't know that if you use Didone typefaces and high contrast imagery and you desaturate photos, that leads to a scary aesthetic. They don't know any of that stuff. But they know that things that are pointy and dark are scary, right? We all know that. We all know that inherently. We know that since we were kids. What about this one? Happy, right? The art, it feels happy. It's for Fitbit. It's supposed to be active. It's supposed to be vibrant, right? That's how it's supposed to feel. Does it feel that way? Yes, right? It's good art direction. If it didn't feel that way, maybe it wouldn't be a good fit for Fitbit. Sorry for that weird pun there. Okay, so you all know how to do art direction. So the question that I'm going to pose to you is this. Does this site that I'm about to show you feel like the right site for the College of Engineering? And maybe more appropriately, does this site feel like the future of the College of Engineering? All right, so let me break character for a minute. I'll probably talk for about 5 minutes here. I've abbreviated here, for time's sake. So I probably talked for 10 minutes with the actual audience. And I haven't even shown you the comps yet. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set the table. I'm trying to properly prepare you to receive what I want you to receive and to ignore all the other stuff. If I didn't say the thing about design or art direction, you might give me feedback about the logo, which I can't change, but you still might give me the feedback anyway. You might say, oh, the logo should be this way, or it should be over there, or make this bigger, or do this. Right? I don't want that feedback. It's not helpful for me. It distracts you, and it just kind of gets me down, right? Like, anytime you say something negative, it's not a bad thing, but when you say things that are negative, there's something in your brain that just kind of chips away at you. Right? And I don't want that to enter this presentation. So I have to direct you to say, pay attention to this stuff over there, not this stuff over here. Right? So that's what I'm trying to do in this whole spiel. Before I show you the things, I'm saying, pay attention to that, not this. Make sense? All right, here we go, back into character. So I'm going to show you some comps. Now, we talked to a lot of people in our research phase, and one of the things that we found is that people really want to know what's happening at this school that's just really, really cool. Right? This university works on the best stuff in the world. And so somebody would go to Google and they'd type in a phrase like robot legs, and the stuff that we're doing here at the university for robot legs should be the top result. And when somebody clicks on that result, or taps on that result, robot legs, they should come across a page that looks like this. Can we dim the lights a little bit? And on a page like this, what we're trying to do, right, the intent here, is that we want to give you a really impactful photo to show you exactly that you have landed on the right spot, right? You Google robot legs, you get the best article about the best research that we're doing about robot legs. After that part of the page, we want to get you right into the meat of the article. So we remove all distraction. So that top part of the page was intended to create drama, to create tension, to really draw you in. And as soon as we have your attention, we want to give you sort of the plainest view of an article that you can read. Now, one of the things that we also found in our research is that a lot of people, when viewing articles like this, there's sort of two modes, right? It's generalizing a little bit, but there's two modes. One is I want to read every single letter of this thing. And so we want to be able to afford for that. The other is that I just kind of want the highlights, so let me skip through this thing. So we have kind of two paths that we're designing for here. One is the main highway, right? It's the 6-lane Los Angeles highway. I just want to zoom through this article and read and absorb everything I can. The other is just post-mile markers, right? So here are all the markers along the way. Things like big images and captions for those images so that I can go from caption to caption, kind of getting the gist of the article. Other things on the page, like really big pull quotes. So pulling things out of the article and saying, okay, this is really important for the reader to know, even if it's duplicated in the actual essay itself. But they're mile markers. They're things that you can stop at. They're milestones along the way. And all the rest is really just about text and reading, really as simply as we can go. We have other exit points too. So doing a lot of media sites, one of the things that we notice is people tend to jump off at the bottom of the before they get to the bottom of the article. So they don't decide when they get to the bottom, oh, I really didn't want to read that. If they're not interested, they'll leave. So we want to design enough off-ramps to this highway that we can do that too. So surfacing things like you might also like, maybe some related articles that maybe if you're interested in the topic, but not this article in particular, being able to do that. And then finally, at the bottom of the article, doing some business. So if you're interested in exploring other research topics like this, you can totally do that. If you want to partner with us, if you're a part of the media, you can do that. Or maybe you're a student that's just like, I want to go to a university that does cool things with robot legs. I'm convinced I want to go apply or learn more about that program, being able to do that too. Then, the thing that we want to do on these article pages too is what we found in our research, which is that people, when they see a topic that they're interested in, they just want to read everything that they can about it in this context. So if you're interested in health and biomedicine, let's just load up the next article, right? So we'll do kind of an infinite scroll presentation where you get to just load all the articles about health and biomedicine as you can. And you can just read and read and read and read. One of the things that we anticipated was people are going to get a little bit confused about where the one article ends and the other article begins. But when we did some light testing around that, it seems like people didn't care. So we asked them, like, do you know where one ended and one other began? They're like, well, no, not really. We're like, okay, cool. Like, how do you think we should fix that? And like, well, I don't know that needs to be fixed. Right? So that was an interesting insight that we hadn't kind of anticipated. If people are interested in the topic, right, if they are interested in health and biomedicine, they can actually tap on one of those little eyebrow links or breadcrumbs on top of the title and go directly to the topic page. Now, the intent of this topic page is to really surface all of the cool things that this university is doing, right? So one of the first designs we started with was a very uniform grid of things, and that actually made things feel really boring. It made them feel monotonous. It made them feel like every single thing was the same. And some of the early feedback that we got on that was that people wanted things to feel more unique. So we designed a couple of different ways that we can show an article, and actually a number of ways. So one is just to show a giant image, right? Like to draw you in, something dramatic, something to draw you in. But another is that sometimes there's an interesting quote from the article that you might want to pull out as a way to draw people in. Other times it's just a title. Other times it's the date. So we have, if you look kind of down this page, you can sort of scan this page for anything that catches your interest and not have to worry about the uniformity of this page, but really just find something that you're like, oh, that looks cool. I want to click on that. I want to read more about that thing. So this page is really just composed of all those different patterns put together. Then, underneath that grid of stories, we also want to give you other research topics that you can explore. So if you liked health and biomedicine, cool. If you want to see what we're doing in cybersecurity or cyber-physical systems, you can go see that too, and you can expect to see something really similar there. We also want to do a good job of featuring one specific thing, so calling out, for example, the Bone Tissue and Engineering Center that this university has is an important, this is kind of an important pattern to be able to use here. And then finally, at the bottom, doing a little bit more business about how to contact the school, how to find out about academic policies, how to do things like that. Now, I'll walk through a couple of pages, and I want to talk about some specific art direction choices. So I'll talk to you a little bit about typography. Now, I'm going to break character here for a minute. Actually, no, I won't break character for a minute. So typography. Some of you may have heard that phrase before. Some of you may not have. But I bet all of you have used Microsoft Word before, right, or some equivalent. And you've probably seen the drop-down that has all the fonts in it, right? And then you've probably just picked the font. Now, how many of you are like, I don't know, this font looks good. I should pick that one, right? Make sense? Some of you have done that. I'll tell you what, I'll let you in on a secret. Designers sometimes do that too. We had that drop-down in an app called Photoshop, and we just picked the one that looks good. We're like, oh, I don't know, like curls sounds like it has a good name. I'm going to use that one. And so one of the things that we knew about this site is that people are going to read on this site a lot. A lot of our research points to that. A lot of the current site statistics point to the fact that people want to read, which is surprising because there's not a lot on the current site. So we wanted the typography, but essentially the fonts, to do a lot of the heavy lifting on the site. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we decided what typography to use. So because it's a site that's designed for you to read, we have this one typeface, and I'll kind of pull it out. So if I zoom out from that and kind of dim everything back, this is the typeface that we're using. Now this typeface is called Graphic. And one of the things that you may or may not know is that just like I'm a designer that has designed a website, typefaces are designed by designers too. And if you think about our definition of design, the rendering of intent, type designers are trying to render some form of intent through their typefaces. So a good way to find out what that intent is to actually read what they wrote about it. Because when they publish typefaces on their websites, they write about what they want people to use these typefaces for. So when I was doing research on Graphic, right, when we came across this, this is what we found. The type designer of Graphic said, Graphic was inspired by the elegant plainness seen in many of the less common 20th century European sans serifs and hand lettering on classic Swiss modern posters. Now a little bit of an art history lesson for you, if you don't know about Swiss modern. It's also known as the International Typographic style. Now that style has had profound influence on graphic design as part of the modernist movement, and that's impacted many design-related fields, including architecture, engineering, and art. It emphasizes cleanliness, readability, and objectivity. Now those three principles are principles that the College of Engineering shares. So what we're trying to do is pick a typeface that has the same principles as the university. And if we can do that, then there should be a pretty good match between the aesthetic, the art direction of the site, the way it feels, and the typefaces that we've chosen. Does that make sense so far? All right, so I'll show you a couple of other things. This typeface, it's designed for reading. It's the one that we're using on most of the body copy. This is a typeface called Quadrat. If I zoom out, that's kind of what it looks like. This is a typeface called Quadrat, and it's made by a type foundry called Font, FF. And here's what they say about Quadrat. Quadrat was born out of careful research in form and function, a combination of Renaissance elegance and contemporary thinking about construction and shaping. All right? Again, pretty good overlap between the principles of the College of Engineering. All right, last one. If I kind of fade back here, you'll see kind of in the background and smaller, we have these stencils that we're using for dates and kind of these big numbers across the page. And this is a typeface called Compass. Now, when I did some research on Compass, there wasn't a lot that was written about it, so I started to dig deeper and tried to research about just stencil typefaces in general. And what I learned was that architects' interest in stencil letters dates to at least the early decades of the 19th century, when they, together with engineers and surveyors, adopted stencils for titling and labeling technical drawings. So this is kind of a feel that we want to lend to the site, the College of Engineering site. It's kind of have this kind of technical feel while still being human and while still having kind of this Renaissance forms. So those go into some of their choices about typography and why we've used those particular typefaces. They weren't chosen at random. They're not things that we're like, oh, curls is a good typeface, we'll use that one. Try to do some research, try to match the principles up with the principles of the site that we're designing. All right, so if I break character for a minute, I'll probably do the same thing with color and other design choices, and then I'll end with something like this. So my question to you is, did what I just showed you, does this feel like the future of the College of Engineering? Does that site feel like the right site for right now for what we need to make out of the College of Engineering? And then I would turn it over to you, the audience, and we would give some feedback, and we'd have kind of a Q&A and have some discussion. Everybody good? Yep. All right, so let's end with this. Your job as designers, right, I'm going to stick with that, designers, even though some of you are engineers and developers and product managers, you're all designers. You're all rendering some form of intent. Maybe it's for your teams or for your clients or for your users. Your job is not just to make things look good. That's not the job of a designer. That's the job of a stylist. These are very different. Your job is not to make things look good, right? Your job is to help set the table for good design to be received, right? And that applies to any of your jobs. Now, whenever I talk to designers about this, there's this quintessential rebuttal that I get. But that's what Apple did. They made good-looking products, and that's why they're so successful. Well, maybe, but I think it's deeper than that. Sure, Apple made the iPhone, and the iPhone is a state-of-the-art piece of equipment. When the iPhone came out, there was nothing else like it. Touchscreen phone had not been invented. Right now, there's a ton more. But this was great design, great hardware, and great software. But they've been setting the table for years. The iPhone came out in 2007. But before that, the iPhone wouldn't have been possible had it not been for iTunes, which came out in 2003. Right? So without iTunes having set the table for the iPhone probably wouldn't have been possible. It's all built on the iTunes ecosystem. And iTunes itself wouldn't have been possible without the iPod, which came out in 2001. Right? So if you think about it, a product that they've designed in 2001, or launched in 2001, set the table for a product that came out in 2007 that is still living strong today. Now, I'm not saying when they came out with the iPod, they were like, aha, in 6 years. But what I am saying is that if there's anything we can learn about the way that Apple designs, they tend to play the long game. Right? They tend to look forward at what's ahead. I would guess, I'm not privy to this information, but I would guess that for every release of a product that they have, they've thought at least 1 or 2 or 3 steps ahead of what's coming next. So I guess my charge to you is that you have the gift of making people pay attention. It's supposed to be on this. You have the gift of making people pay attention. That's probably the best gift that a designer has, and probably the best talent that any designer, anybody who renders intent has. So if you can properly set the table to make your users, your stakeholders, your bosses, your clients pay attention to what they actually care about and not pay attention to anything else, then perhaps the best surprise of all is that you can just design anything you want. Obrigado.